Hey, Frankie and Arlo. Yesterday, Hurricane Ian made landfall on the west coast of Florida, south of Tampa. It was originally supposed to hit Tampa head on. They evacuated especially the low-lying areas of Tampa because there's a ton of people there. It's way bigger than Jacksonville is. Not as big as Miami. And they were pretty certain it was going to hit there, but it veered south. And it came ashore somewhere between Sarasota and Tampa. It was a Category 5, devastating hurricane. One of the worst hurricanes to hit the United States. If you listen, you can hear the rain coming down, because the path of the hurricane took it across to Orlando to Daytona Beach, and now it's coming up the Atlantic. It's going to miss us, hopefully, by a little bit. But for the next couple of days, we're going to get a lot of wind and rain. You can actually hear the wind there hitting the top of our chimney and coming down, and I hope it doesn't knock this beautiful fireplace. We have this stained glass fireplace protector, whatever you would call it. Usually there's screens, but this is just beautiful. I don't think it would knock it over. We're more concerned, Arlo, with you knocking it over when you're here visiting. So I was just outside channeling my inner Jim Cantore. Jim Cantore, Arlo, is a man on the Weather Channel. He'll still probably be on there when you're old enough to be watching the Weather Channel. And he's the point man. He goes to the worst place that the hurricane's gonna hit. And then he stands out in these horrendous winds. Today, I saw him get hit by part of a tree. Yet he wears a helmet now. And he stands out there and he talks about how bad the hurricane is. Now, what happens with hurricanes a lot of times is they get everybody worked up, and then it turns out to turn out to sea, or it'll fizzle out. But there's always the chance that this is going to be the one that really does damage. And I started to think about not just hurricanes that I've been in, but hurricanes that have affected my life and the life of those around me. I remember one time, I think I was a kid at the time, that I was actually in the eye of a hurricane. It was amazing. We went from this like rain to all of a sudden dun, 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 dun. It doesn't last that long, and then the other part of the storm comes in. But I remember it like it was yesterday. So today is Tuesday, September 29th, 2022. And Hurricane Ian is passing us on the coast in a couple hours, as I said, hopefully. But let's go back and talk about hurricanes. Because, Frankie, last time I talked to you, you were in Palm Beach County, Florida. Arlo, you live in Tennessee, but your family lives on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. And when you live on those two coasts, there's always a possibility that you're going to have to deal with hurricanes. And quite frankly, Arlo, you're going to probably have more hurricanes hit you than are going to hit grandmother and me, or Aunt Courtney and Uncle Sam, who live in New Orleans, because all the hurricanes, after they hit land and they become tropical storms and then tropical depression, and then they become just this bad storm, they head for places like Tennessee, upstate Georgia. So right now, the cone of the hurricane, the track that they think the hurricane's going to take, it's going to take it up through Atlanta, talking about Hurricane Ian, and into the eastern part of Tennessee. So you will probably see this storm in a couple days, Arlo. The first hurricane I want to talk to you about, I didn't witness. I just got to witness the after effects, and that was what was known as the Ash Wednesday hurricane in 1962. Actually, I'm misspeaking. Technically, it wasn't a hurricane. Technically, it was a nor'easter. I believe today that they would have called it a hurricane. Hurricane Sandy happened in the winter sometime, and this was in the winter. And I think back then they just didn't call them hurricanes because they didn't happen during hurricane season, but this was a hurricane. It affected a great swath of New Jersey. Stone Harbor had a lot of flooding and a lot of wind damage. I remember going to see places at the north end of the island in Avalon that were just like chopped off, and all the houses were gone. Down at 89th and the beach, there used to be a house. I'm not talking about on 89th Street at the beach. I'm talking about on the beach. At 88th Street, you have the pavilion where your grandmother and I got married. And then a block south of there at 89th Street, there was a kind of a boardwalk that went out, just like the one at the pavilion. And at the end of that boardwalk, there was a house that was up on stilts, and that was gone. There were a bunch of beachfront properties that were gone. We were fortunately on the high part of the island, which was just a few feet above sea level, but it was enough to get us through it. It changed Stone Harbor. It changed the way they reacted to things. It changed the real estate market. There were a lot of people who just said, oh, I'm leaving. I don't want to live in a place that this happens. It really hasn't happened again since then. And that was 60 years ago. There was Hurricane Sandy actually came ashore right near Stone Harbor, but I don't think that it did that much damage. So maybe one storm in 60 years that did substantial damage. Some people said, oh, I can get a house for next to nothing, because housing prices plummeted on the island, and they bought houses. Some of them bought several houses, started renting them out, and made a ton of money. So it really changed things, and it was kind of my first meeting with a hurricane and the damage they can do and all that. The second hurricane I want to talk to you about is Hurricane Camille. I forget exactly when Camille hit Biloxi, Mississippi. Maybe 1971, 1972. But because that happened, and it was one of the worst that ever hit the country, we had a hurricane named Carmen that was coming when I was in tech school in Biloxi, Mississippi at Keesler Air Force Base. And they called us into this big auditorium and said, listen, all you guys from the East Coast who go on hurricane watch parties, we just want to show you a movie. So they showed us a movie of Hurricane Camille. There was one shot in the movie where there was a tree and a straw, like a wheat straw, grass straw, had been driven through the tree. This was before Photoshop. Maybe it was fake, but they were trying to make a point with us. And they locked us down on the base. They said, we don't want you having a hurricane party. What is a hurricane party? The hurricane's coming, and you go out and hang out on the beach and watch it come in. Which is fine if it's not a bad hurricane. If it's a bad hurricane, maybe everybody that's at the party dies. So they wanted to make a point, and they locked us down. And then Hurricane Carmen, I don't think really was that bad, but it's the military. They can tell you anything they want to tell you. And you have to do it. You have to follow orders. The next one is 1985, Hurricane Gloria. Hurricane Gloria was supposed to be the storm of the century. I went to Stone Harbor. And I forget why. I don't know if I went there because of Hurricane Gloria, but I was off of work and there was a hurricane coming and I went. Probably went because if the hurricane misses, there's really good surf. If a hurricane's coming up the coast and it's off the coast, it pushes big waves in and pulls the wind out to sea. So it makes nice, clean, rideable, large waves. I don't like large waves now, but I kind of did back then. And that was probably why I was down there. But I remember that I had a tape recorder and a camera. This is before digital cameras. So I didn't know what the camera was taking pictures of, but I did the equivalent of selfies, where I set it up on a tripod. And then I took some pictures of me where I put it on a timer for 10 seconds, and then sit down. And it was me sitting at the kitchen table on 8614 Pennsylvania Avenue. On the tape recorder, I was saying my thoughts as if they were going to be my last thoughts. They were predicting 175-mile-an-hour winds. They decided to evacuate the island. Now, at the time, I was a police officer. So I'm thinking, I'm not evacuating the island. I'm staying here. I went down to look at the beach, and my neighbors, the Ottens, were getting ready to leave. And Margie Otten said, Beanie, which was my nickname, Beanie, you need to leave the island. And I said, no, I don't, Margie. It's going to be good surf. It's going to miss us. And I want to be here for the surf. And she said, you need to listen to me. We have never left this island. We've been through horrendous hurricanes, and we haven't left. We own an island in the Bahamas. We've been through horrendous hurricanes there, and we've never tried to escape and evacuate. But we're doing it this time, and you need to do it too. And I said, okay, I'll think about it. But I knew I wasn't going to do it. Then I ran into Mrs. Smith, who lived on 2nd Avenue across from Chip's house. Probably talk about Chip and another one of these. Mrs. Smith was somebody that she was a little difficult to get along with. But she was a neighbor, she was a good neighbor. and she was older. And she said she was leaving, and I said, well, I'm going to stay. And she said, well, you know, the police are going to come over, they're going to come around. And I said, well, I'm hiding the car. So I took my car and I hid it. Don't you know, when the police came to her house, I was peeking out the window and I saw her walk up to the corner and point to our house and then point to the yard where I had the car hidden. And next thing you know, the police are outside on the bullhorn. You need to evacuate the island. So I went out and said, look, I'm a police officer. Here's my badge. I'm going to stay and I'll help. No, you're leaving the island. We're going to come back here in a little bit. And if you're not going, you're right, you're going to stay, but you're going to stay in jail. Which isn't a good thing to happen when you're a cop. It'd be hard to explain why I didn't make it back to my shift in a couple days because, well, I'm in jail in Stone Harbor. That turned out to be a storm that kind of fizzled out. I forget exactly how it fizzled out. It may have just hooked off to the right. I didn't get to find out if there was surf. Because when they fizzle out, it's still a horrible storm. It's just not the storm of the century like they're saying. And the last one that I want to talk about is actually a series of hurricanes. They're Harvey, Irma, Nate, and Maria. But I don't want to tell that whole story because I did in another one of these videos called Mi Español No Es Bueno. But because of that series of hurricanes hitting various places, the only one I believe that hit the Miami area where we lived and that caused damage to our house was Irma. But through that series of hurricanes, I wound up being in Houston for 45 days, supporting FEMA, and having an experience that was enlightening and fulfilling. So you never know what's going to happen. Hurricanes are bad, but good things can come out of them. I hope I'm not through many more in my life. I'm 69 now. I don't know how long I have on this planet before the Lord takes me home, but I hope He keeps me in places that don't have a lot of hurricanes. They're scary, and I saw Jim Cantore in 100-mile-an-hour winds this morning. I had trouble in what was probably 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts, maybe a little bit more than that, and I could hardly stand. It was pushing me back. So stay cool, stay high and dry. Peace out, guys.